I'm Paul Jolly, and I'm interviewing George Collin on behalf of the Accidental Archivist project, which is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. George, before we get into all your times at 33, can you tell me a bit of background? Were you born in Luton, or were you?
Certainly not.
Right.
No, born in 1955 in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire on Merseyside. But yes, so I came to Luton when I was 25, 26 in 1981. So prior to that, I'd always lived on Merseyside. Went to Liverpool Polytechnic, got a law degree, stayed on Merseyside, did some professional exams, 2 years as a trainee solicitor, which we used to call an article clerk, and then another year fully qualified in 1980 before I then took up a job in Luton. So in terms then of why would I bother going to Guildford Street, I had been involved in the Ellesmere Port Film Society, on the committee and one of the sort of chief projectionists, and that reminds me that through that we also had a bit of controversy involving the Merseyside Arts Association, which I attended some meetings, mass meetings at Liverpool Town Hall on behalf of the Film Society. I won't go into detail, but it just looking over things in the last few days, you think, yes, well, okay, yeah, I did have some experience of problems with arts administration and local authorities trying to take over from sort of democratic organisations that they'd set up but were suddenly running out of control. So that's that. But when I was 21 in 1976, discussions with the family, 21st birthday, was given some Super 8 equipment, silent camera, silent projector, little editing thing, because I was interested to try out some bits of animation. I don't know why, but yeah, I had this, because we'd never had anything like that in the family. But I trained as a solicitor, got no arts qualifications. My brother did a foundation course in art, and a bit of osmosis, I probably picked up some ideas from that. So at school, they wouldn't let me do O-level art, the exam. I didn't do well enough in the mock, so I got a grade 1 in CSE, which is equivalent to an O-level pass. But I just, one reason, at the mock O-level, I had to draw a holly leaf, and then we had to develop some ideas from that drawing. So I did, and I thought I did very well, but they didn't. And I'd taken this holly leaf concept of dark green on one side and light green on the other, and the way the leaf curls round on itself, and done all kinds of other colour combinations and things. Anyway, so but wasn't good enough. So when I eventually did one of my films, Red, Blue, Green, just to teach the school a lesson, I included this spinning holly leaf, and it changes colour, and the background changes colour, and the berries change colour, so that you lose all concept of what's supposed to be what colour. It's all quite mad, really. And that's, you do these things because you think, I'm going to make a point here that this is a good idea. Why didn't you let me do the O-level exam?
And you weren't influenced by anyone, it's just all kind of playing with the material was what inspired you to do that. It wasn't, you hadn't seen anybody else's work or been
well, we could talk about influences.
Yeah.
Len Lai, Oscar Fischinger, Robert Breer in more recent times, yeah, anything goes, in a sense.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
anything goes is the point. Anyway, so I say, I had the Super 8 equipment, joined the local cine club, did lots of little experiments, and then someone in the cine club said, well, why don't you make a complete film? Oh, I never thought of that. I never thought that anything I was going to do would actually be a complete film. So, you know, with Super 8, you can do about 2.5 minutes on one cassette. So I did a little film called Candle, and we showed that. There was a meeting of 3 cine clubs, I think, friendly competition, and so my film Candle was included in that. It's a sort of abstract but narrative, and it was quite shocking really to see my film on the screen, and it was almost like I was standing at the front naked really, because you know, oh right, that's me, that's all me up on the screen there. But this was quite a shock to the system really. I've got used to it over the years, but it's like people don't like seeing themselves, you know, their own photographs and all the rest of it. Well, you don't really want to see your own animation either, because
sure, yeah.
You know how personal it is, as it were, especially if it's something like that rather than something commercial.
Yeah. Anyway,
So by there were some people in the cine club doing very good local documentaries on 16mm, and I realised that Super 8 was okay, but if you're going to put all that effort into a bit of animation, you might as well do it on 16mm, because you know, even if the film was 3 times as much as the Super 8 film, but compared with the amount of time and energy that you'd put in, you might as well have that extra quality.
Yeah.
So someone in the cine club was selling 16mm Bolex H16.
The very same camera.
The very same camera.
Amazing.
As old as I am.
So what year was that?
Well, it was built. So the camera was built in about 1955.
Wow.
In Switzerland. It's over-engineered. That's the point. It's optically the optics are brilliant, and mechanically, it's you know, intended as an amateur film camera, it's much better than it needs to be,
Yeah.
and so it's stood the test of time, and the quality and the pin registration, you know, that the images don't wobble around, everything's absolutely rock steady.
Yeah.
So that's, and we'll come to it, but that's all you need. What was all you needed then.
So that doesn't record sound though, does it? That's the
Absolutely
old-
not.
just-
No.
just-
It's a
just
clockwork camera.
Yeah. Wind it up.
There's no batteries.
Yeah.
And you do single frames just like that. So you have a cable release, but it's essentially you take single frames, 2.5 minutes, open spool film.
So if you was running it as film, it would just film for 2.5 minutes.
24 frames a second. Well, the clockwork motor would only run for 20 seconds.
Wow.
So you can take shots up to 20 seconds long, and you know, and the whole film cassette will last 2.5 minutes, and then you need to reload.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a beautiful. In a sense, you know, you talk about lucky break. Others have talked about lucky breaks, and so yes, very lucky really that I got this. Quite cheaply, £75 I think, but at the time.
Yeah, it was quite a lot of money in those days, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
£5.
Oh yeah, more than now of course. But you know, if I'd got some other equipment, but as others have said, David Arnold said, you know, if you really want to do something, do it. You know, borrow the equipment you need. You know, everything else you need to borrow. Nice to have your own camera, but everything else. You know, borrow a projector, borrow an editing bench, you know, use laboratory facilities to do this, that and the other, you know, there are people who get so obsessed with owning equipment. I found this, you know, especially in the amateur cine side, you know, they just want to keep acquiring equipment, and the answer is no, try not to acquire any equipment apart from the bare essentials.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's what got me into 16mm. And you know, semi-professional quality, and so that was all of that. And then I moved to Luton for a solicitor's job in 1981, and Oh yes, also prior to that, I'd also been involved in Liverpool with helping form a branch of the Independent Filmmakers Association. I was the first treasurer, and I can't quite remember how that came about, but these things do, you know, through local contacts. Obviously they were quite a radical bunch, social issues and political issues, and again sort of very avant-garde filmmaking, which was fine by me. You know, not quite my cup of tea, but I'm very open to it. So all of that background, came to Luton, new job, and you know, right, well, what are the facilities here? I joined the Luton Amateur Cine Club, and you know, stuck my head in at 33, and I'd probably noticed from the local paper and so on that you know, they had regular open screenings of local work and screenings of feature films and all kinds of things and other performances. So and also Gavin was just starting to run some very basic video courses.
That's right, it's the early days of the video.
So I attended one of those, but as I say, video has never really been my thing. And you know, and there was a cafe, of course, and you know, everyone was very welcoming, very open, very interested, you know, in what I was doing, and so you know, that was a very natural sort of fit.
Was it? Did we have at that point when you came first? Did we have the Steenbeck and the?
No, nothing
later.
at all.
Yeah.
No. So on the artistic side, I say I was just using this, and then I don't want to get too technical, but you would afterwards get the film with a magnetic stripe put on it so that you could record onto it, a very thin magnetic stripe just down the edge of the film. So you could then put the soundtrack on the actual film and run on a projector. So in the spring of '82, I submitted a film using cutouts. Arnold Loses His Head, to the BBC in Norwich around a regional annual amateur film. They did, at that time, they did two half-hour programmes in the spring of '82. And one Sunday had to go to the studios in Norwich, and they recorded both programmes in one day with an audience, you see. And so animation was one of the categories, and I got first prize.
Fantastic.
I got £100.
Yeah.
The film had cost me £40 to make, so I was quids in. Yeah. So that was good. Didn't have, well, I might have used some facilities. I can't remember how the sound got on the film, whether that was someone at 33 or someone at the the amateur cine club. But anyway, that was good. That little story film also I put in for other national competitions, and so in the autumn of '82, I suppose, that was then included in it didn't win a national prize, but it won a runner-up prize in the national competition, the Movie Maker 10 Best competition in those days. And so it was included in the programme of runner-up films at the National Film Theatre. And last couple of days I was thinking that I've got the National Film Theatre programme notes to prove
Fantastic.
it. But it was on Kodachrome, like slide film, and it was a story film that had lots of shots, close-ups, long shots, whatever. And so there were lots of splices and edits in it, which in those days you did cement splices, you see.
Yeah, you just cut on the block, didn't you?
Yeah. A little block you cut and you use this acetate cement and you stuck it all together. Anyway, it was rather embarrassing at the National Film Theatre. they'd obviously decided to reinforce all of these with tape splices, very crudely. So every time, and maybe at least on average every 5 seconds, when the change from one shot to another in 2.5 minutes, suddenly the picture jumped on the screen, and probably the sound dropped out as well because the tape was over the magnetic stripe, and it was an embarrassment really, and so disappointing. But so I then thought, right, from now onwards, I'm going to make films not on Kodachrome. I'll do that to try out.
Yes.
It'll be on colour negative film,
Right.
and it'll have an optical soundtrack, just like a proper professional industrial 16mm production. And and therefore, if I ever get anything ever shown at the National Film Theatre again, it'll go on their standard projectors and it will look like the real thing.
Yeah.
I never have had any film subsequently shown at the National Film Theatre, but that was the reasoning
The plan for it.
behind that. So anyway, so we come back to then. So once that was my ambition, really, then the connections and facilities at 33 became more important.
Yeah.
And again, it's interesting watching other people's interviews, how selective and partial people's memories are, and so is
Sure,
mine.
absolutely.
You're trying to put dates on everything. But anyway, so trying to put things in sequence. I'd done various abstract things as well as this little story film. And then I suppose, I did, let's take it anyway, say the next one I did was probably, it was the one called Red, Blue, Green. Just abstract, cell animation. Then there was a chap, and you'll have to remind me, this is a conversation with Paul, before Dermot arrived, there was a chap called Eddie Newstead.
Eddie Newstead, yeah.
Now, I don't know, you tell me, what was his status there?
Eddie Newstead was someone who got involved with the project, but he was a professional photographer and filmmaker. But
He was indeed. I've just looked him up
Yeah.
recently and found that references to him on the American Library of Congress database.
he was
So yeah,
really well known for industrial photography.
yes,
So he would things like photographing ball bearings being made and
and soap bubbles in particular.
soap operas.
Yes.
And he was I don't know what equipment it.
And he made a very avant-garde feature film as well, which I think he showed us at 33.
Yes,
Very strange feature film. But anyway, yes, so I don't know what his status was, but he helped me anyway.
Yeah, he helped, and he helped Dermot as well. And
Okay.
They all worked. Eddie was quite generous with his knowledge.
Where is he now?
He first passed away. He had
Okay.
quite young. He had a car accident, and but he's come up in conversation recently because we have a unbelievably beautiful painting by Eddie,
Right.
which is being preserved at the moment.
Okay.
And it's a painting on glass, but
Okay.
yeah, technically it was amazing.
Well, you can interject, but the point was that he introduced me. I was doing this film, colour negative, but again, quite in a crude way, not in a fully professional way. And Paul and others helped with some improvised jazz music. But what I then had to do in order to combine the images, these abstract images, things that were red, blue and green, holly leaves, etc., with this avant-garde music, so that there might be half a minute of this particular type of image, so half a minute of this particular improvised jazz. I had a thing Eddie produced a thing called a pick sync, and it was like a hand-cranked tape recorder. So you couldn't really appreciate the quality of the music, especially improvised jazz. And you were you'd heard the music on an ordinary tape, and you now had the music on magnetic coated sprocketed film, the same as 16mm image film, and so you could run the two together through one machine.
Yeah.
But it was really a struggle to try and work out what music really matched. Because you
So
gave me a couple of hours of music to,
Yeah.
to try out with. And afterwards, I'd realised, actually, I could have been a lot bolder if only I'd been able to really hear the music against the images. There were other examples that I could have been bolder and used, but I was uncertain. So that was the thing, this pick sync. I think there might have been motorised versions available, but the version we had, you just had to hand crank and it took the sprocketed film and the sprocketed soundtrack through together.
So was that a kind of early way of syncing it in other ways?
Well, that's right. So you could sync it.
Yeah.
You could never do lip sync or anything, but you could, yes, match and the cuts. You could cut then, say, right, well, I want this piece of music up for this 30 seconds of film. But anyway, so that was, Eddie helped me with that, especially on the technical side, and encouraged me on the technical side, because when you're taking the plunge to work on colour negative film, and you have to then use a film lab rather than just send your film off to Kodak and it comes back in the post, whatever, it's a different world really. You're dealing with, yes, and on the sound mixing side as well, you having to use a film lab in London to take your 1/4 inch tape and put it onto 16mm sprocketed tape. We might have done that in an amateurish way with a sound projector, but certainly there was a stage when that simply went off to London to be done. So that was well, I say using musicians from 33, using technical film assistants from professional filmmaker at 33, and the sheer encouragement of, yes, George, we want to see what you're doing. We really do want to see. There's a comment I would make that, why do you do things? Well, I once, to get it straight, someone was asked why they'd written the book, and it was like the collected correspondence of some famous person. And he said, well, why did you write this book? And he said, well, because I wanted to read it. It didn't exist. The only way this book was going to exist was if I created it. Then I could read it. Well, yes, well, you don't need to read it because you wrote it. But so similarly, you have these ideas in your mind. You have images, you have sounds in your mind, or that people have offered you. And you think, I wonder what that looks like, Well, you're not going to know what it looks like unless you actually sit down and do it. So, that's why you do. And the other general comment that people I know make is, work is what you do for other people and art is what you do for yourself. Yeah. So, say all of this stuff we're talking about so far was very much, in my view, art and of course, personal expression. But always, as I say, I was working full-time as a solicitor, and apart from my CSE art certificates with no art qualifications, but animation doesn't necessarily involve spectacular art skills.
No,
it's playing with time, you see, as it's Terry Gilliam, I think, certainly him, if not others, that doing animation is like being God. You're 24 frames a second, you're doing 24 frames a second, and you're putting life into these drawings, and especially if you then add sound and music and sound effects, as Terry Gilliam, I think it's the nearest thing to being God that exists.
I mean, from what I can remember, you were the only person really involved in animation.
It's a shame because at various stages we tried to encourage and offer workshops and things to other people, and we didn't really get much response. Dermot did some, we'll come on to Dermot shortly, but I suppose, and there was a screening in the late 80s, I suppose, of the best of British animation circulated and shown at the Library Theatre. Yes. And we handed out, leaflets saying, if you've seen this is, why don't you can do the same as these people have done. You can do the same. You can come along. But we never really got much response. And by that time, I think all the young people were either already sitting in front of their computers, or were into video taken
Yeah,
over.
and then the video.
And that's where all the interest was.
For sure, then it became very drama based, didn't it?
That's right. And video, you know, in those days, you couldn't really do animation with it. Only it was more trouble than it was worth. You're better off carrying on with film if you're doing animation. I know, you know, computers now you can do lots, but that was the situation in those days. So I, you know, very much, you know, there weren't others doing it as seriously as me, but you know, there was an opportunity to share ideas with people, use resources, and all of that encouragement. So, as you say, Dermot arrived, and I always felt I was on the same wavelength as Dermot.
Yes.
A lot of my films involve repetition of images, cycles of images. If you see the show reel at the start, there's like, it's almost like the corner of a room, and all the walls and the ceilings and floors, they're all going in perspective, crossing over. And you see between the gaps of the squares, the other levels all crossing over. And that's just a cycle of 8 frames.
Yeah.
It's just 8 drawings, and you just film the same drawings over and over, or you put them all on a loop and you stick it together and it goes through the projector on a loop. We did that once, you know, here's George's latest film, you know, and potentially it just goes on forever until the audience gets bored, because it's just 8 frames. So a lot of repetition, which is a bit like music, but you know, some people don't want repetition in images.
Yeah.
But and Dermot was one of those who encouraged me that, yeah, you know, this is worthwhile. This makes sense.
Dermot came, didn't you, with more of a film interest than video. I know you went into video later. That's why I was asking the question about the Steenbeck.
Yeah, so we had this PicSync, and then partly, I mean, as much to help with Dermot's film work
Yes.
as not so much mine. Then the Steenbeck editing bench arrived. Now that was a proper professional bench. They come in various types, but this allowed you to run the film, sprocketed soundtracks, 2 soundtracks I think that particular machine took.
Yeah.
So you could have 2 soundtracks, all tightly synchronized, and you could edit it as you went. You know, you could cut up the film, you could cut up the sprocketed tape, and it all still made sense and ran through. And it was, you had a monitor screen.
That's right, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And the little multi-face prism thing that shone through the film and so on. And yeah, that was a proper professional piece of equipment. And then you could really judge, synchronize, and listen to the quality of the sound as well as the actual
I mean, that was
mechanical stuff.
I've been trying to think back a bit, but that must have been a major resource investment by us at that time for that Steenbeck.
Yes, as I say, I wasn't really involved in the decision making over
Yeah,
it, but obviously I was delighted when it arrived.
Yeah, I think it must have come through grants through Eastern Arts or Film East at that time.
Yeah.
But,
Eventually it was disposed of because it was really surplus to requirements once
video took over.
video took over. I was using that up until 1990 though. Anyway, so I said after Red, Blue, Green, I did another one, Chessboard, which I've been working on for some years, all to do with perspective. But all hand drawn, no computers involved. That was okay, and the soundtrack was fun, tightly synchronized and things, and as I say, all on 16mm colour negative, optical sound. Showed it around various places, and then An Illusion was the one I finally did in the same way, and that was a fairly professional looking product. I won't get too technical, but that was A and B roll printing, so you could do sophisticated lap dissolves and you couldn't see the splices at all, and optical soundtrack and sound mixed. Me and Spon went down to a special facility in outskirts of London where they mix soundtracks. And it was interesting because that was a professional facility that was, the people there were almost quite bored, and when we turned up with what I'd got, they were really interested and into it, you know.
Right.
They really wanted to help and they really wanted to do the best.
Because the other stuff was commercially.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
They were having to redo some stuff for the foreign markets and things like that, you know. There's one thing you find, you know, you think, you know, occasionally, like dealing with facilities in London, they seem very cynical and not really interested in you. Well, you're just an amateur filmmaker, you know. And other people, you find, really are delighted to have something really creative to work on. And so, you know, that can be a very pleasant surprise to work in partnership with people to get the best sound mix and all the rest of it. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I forgot Spon had got involved as well with the sound side of that. But
yes.
yeah.
Yes, he's another one ought to be mentioned.
Yes.
Couple of things I would just mention before we go on to the admin side. Perhaps you can ask me anything you like. But so I ended up then going to every 2 years there was an animation festival. To start with, it was in Cambridge, 83, 85. It had been running for some years, but that's when I first went, 83, 85. Then it was in Bristol a couple of times, probably 87, 89. And then the last one I went to was probably in 91, was in Cardiff. And that was the only way you could really get to see the latest national and international animation. And you met people. First one I went to in Cambridge tended to be in November time. There were some lecturers in art and in animation courses that I'd sort of half come across, and you know, you were rubbing shoulders with these people, and you know, spending the evening in the bar with them, and really learning a lot, and seeing some great animation done in this country and from all around the world. And I met people from Cosgrove Hall in Manchester who did the Danger Mouse, and they did Wind in the Willows, they did all kinds of things. They did an animated version of the BFG, which was very well received. Anyway, and some of them were there at the animation festival, I remember, and chatting to them, and you know, and I was quite envious of them because they were in the animation industry. Thinking, well, you know, maybe I could be. Remind me to come back to that. But you see, my parents, when I got my law degree, and it's still going to be a struggle to actually, you know, qualify as a solicitor and actually, you know, get a job and making a living at it, which I thoroughly enjoyed for 40 years. But there we are. But you know, having got my law degree and so on, and hard to pass the professional exams, but managed it. You know, my parents said, "Oh well, you know, and I was doing some serious animation. Well, you know, do you want to, you know, forget about law and you know do this?" And I was quite amazed at how open my parents were to
yeah, because that's unusual.
How much we'd all invested in my legal training. But yeah, I said, well, no, but it's great to know that you're so laid back about it. But hopefully the legal thing will still work. But you know, yes, you know, so. There I was, you know, still always toying with the idea that if the law didn't work out, then it might be fun. Anyway, so I was envious of them. They were envious of me because they were like working on one particular aspect of producing Danger Mouse cartoons. But
not the whole thing.
Not the whole thing. Yeah. And they had ideas they wanted.
Yeah.
And they had ideas they wanted to bring to the screen. And they were envious of me because I was doing the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, you weren't being paid by.
I didn't have a studio. All I had was my Bolex camera and just borrowed everything else. and and I could put my ideas up on the screen. So that was very illuminating. That maybe I'm not too badly off because I am able to do what I want to.
For sure.
And they can't. Or they haven't really got. David Arnold's talked about this. If you can do a Hollywood film score just sitting on the end of the bed with a keyboard.
Yeah.
Take it to the studio afterwards, but the creative part of it, you don't need anything.
No.
So I thoroughly agree with that. You don't need anything, and don't feel that you can't do something because you haven't got all the studio equipment
I think
that goes with it.
that was fundamental to our philosophy at 33, was to make resources available to people to come and do stuff.
So as I say, I went to animation festivals and that was great fun.
Yeah.
Eventually I had a film shown in an open screening, but as I said, rubbing shoulders with people who'd won Oscars, was a marvellous experience. And I went always as a delegate, and on the paperwork I always put that I was there. It was my money, but I was there as involved with Luton Community Arts Trust and Film Video and so on. So I always made a point of that, and those were that. The also there was I ended up, because of my interest in animation, and there was like a quarterly semi-professional publication called the Animator magazine, and it covered a book that had come out. Tony White, London professional animator, big studio, lots of commercials and things. It published a book on animation, and it had a section on perspective, when it was wrong. And I contacted the editor of the Animator magazine and said, what he said, he may have got some assistant to do that part of it, but I can't believe that he really thinks this is right. Because, I've seen his work. He says, this isn't what they do. This isn't right. So the editor, David Jefferson, he said, well, do you want to do a review and criticism of the book? I said, no, I don't. But I'll do you an article on perspective in animation. And he said, okay. So I did a series of 3 articles on the basics of perspective, movement in perspective, and cylindrical perspective, which were very well received. I got some letters of thanks. One I remember I never did hear from Tony White, but I didn't name him. I name him, happy to name him now, because the book's been republished, and reprinted, and still with the same errors in it.
It's not been corrected at all.
No. They've just reprinted the same old book, and so don't rely on what it says about perspective. But anyway, I didn't make a point of naming him or trying to think about it. But another person who had written a book on animation sent me a letter thanking me for these articles and saying how good they were, And I thought, oh well, he's written a book on animation, and this is good. Someone else who'd ended up doing some little 30-second inserts on the Take Heart TV programme, which had Morph in it.
Oh yes,
but they had other little animated inserts as well, and so they. It was a spin-off from what you and I will recall Vision On, and then Tony Hart was involved in that, and then he had his own art programme, Take Heart. And anyway, this chap who'd done some little 30-second animated inserts, he wrote to me and thanked me that he'd taken some of the stuff I'd put in this article, especially on cylindrical perspective, and he'd incorporated it in what he'd done for the TV programme. And you think, well, that's fine, that's all I need to know, that thank you, what I've said has been
proved to be correct.
Well, correct, and others have appreciated what I've contributed. I know, but so anyway, so all of that kind of thing, is great. But there we are, as you say, 1990 onwards. You know, I've still got ideas. If anyone wants to pay me to make some films, I've still got ideas. I'd use the computer to film them. I'd use the computer to project them, but they still all be hand drawn.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use the computer to do anything else other than those basic ends of the process. But you know, you feel you've done the main things you wanted to do, technically and artistically, and you know, time is short, and there's other things you want to do.
Yeah.
So and because you know everyone by then is doing video and computer and so on, and you think no, that's not really what I want to do. I just want to. Yeah. It all needs to be hand drawn. So I think that unless you've got any questions, we've sort of dealt with the creative side.
Yeah, just interesting that it was unusual for your parents to actually come up with that, because back in the day I can always remember people saying, "Oh, I've got to make sure I get a day job before I do anything artistic." So
yes,
you did, that was quite interesting.
Yeah, well, quite, because you know we weren't a wealthy family or anything, but that was all of that. But so go on.
I was just going to ask, because you know, when everyone talks about you, they always talk about the wonderful toothpaste advert you did.
Yes, yes. So we'll deal with that. So, so I have to sort of settle an local urban myth that you can go on YouTube, you can find compilations of adverts shown on Pakistani television in the 1980s for Dentonic tooth powder. But they're nothing to do with anything that I did.
Right, okay.
They are a similar concept, so now I know that you've asked Jean you know, what she remembers, and she remembers nothing.
Yes.
But that's in a sense because, among other things, she was the bookkeeper for the film and video.
Yeah.
And we never did get paid.
No.
So, and it never was a proper commission. I suppose I should have had my suspicions from the start, really. And I don't know who was approached at 33 film and video.
It wasn't Dermot then.
It might have been Dermot. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
But someone was approached. That they wanted a prototype, I'll call it a prototype, of a 30-second advertisement for Dentonic tooth powder, which was very successful, certainly in Pakistan. I'm not sure how much wider it was, still is. You can go on the website, it's still very much sold. I don't know what other countries they exported to, so we were asked to produce a prototype, and so they looked to me to do the artwork, and so you can always edit this out, but I was just going to produce what we were basically given. Yeah. Was that this was it. That they had billboards all over Pakistan. Yeah. Now I'm not interested in cricket, but I have subsequently noticed that if you look up photographs online of cricket matches, international test matches in Pakistan, sometimes there's a billboard at the cricket ground, and there is Dentonic tooth powder.
With the same image.
Basically the same image as we have here. So they've got this little man called Mr. Dentonic tooth powder, and it's made by ALA Chemicals, ALA, and so they use the ALA to make up the eyes and the nose, and so that's what it was. That's what we were given. Yeah.
And the tagline, the with and without brush.
With or without brush.
Yes.
The one they eventually you'll see on telly, which they did one themselves, not similar to our prototype, but not stealing anything from our prototype, has a different slogan to it.
Right.
Twice a day or something. Anyway, you can go on YouTube, you can find it, just put in the word Dentonic.
It will come up.
There's a 30-second version, there's a 15-second version. So, but as I say, there's basically just this two-dimensional piece of artwork. That's all they had. So the idea was to have to create something that was more rounded, you know, a character that could actually, full-length character. So I did some model sheets, trying to take the basic upper body image and trying to think, well, what might that look like from the side, from a three-quarter view? Kind of standard animation way of approaching things to create a rounded character by doing these model sheets. And so I did that, and I remember we met in one of the pubs. Those of us that film and video were interested in doing this, and were we going to do it or were we going to do it? I showed them these model sheets of how he might look from different angles, and then I made a little plasticine model, painted up with acrylic paints.
Oh wow, you still have it?
You may want to do a little insert of something, but I've still got it. Anyway, so I made a little model man.
Oh wow.
And I remember some of us were sitting around the pub, around a table in the pub, and I said, you know, and this is what he would actually look like. Yeah. And they said, wow, right, now it makes sense, you know, because, we started with this just two-dimensional image. Right, you know, we can do something with this, you know. And I remember someone then took it up to the others who were still at the bar saying, look what George has made, this is Mr. Dentonic in the round, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so that really clinched it, that yes, this was something we could do. Anyway, we had some basic ideas. I had the technical skill to do it in cell animation, do all the drawings, trace them onto cells, proper multi-layer cells, all different things happening. Others worked on the soundtrack, and we progressed. I can't remember or never knew quite what the financial deal was supposed to be. Maybe, the answer is there never was a financial deal. And really, you know, I've read books on animation that say never do any work on speculation, you know, get some contract out of somebody before you actually spend any time on anything. But I was genuinely interested in what were the possibilities of doing something here. And so there came a point when those at the film and video said, George, you know, sorry to tell you, but really it's not going to happen. We'd done a rough edit. I'd only filmed on Kodachrome slide film, and they'd put together a rough edit on video and shown it to whoever was offering us this job. And I'd already got my suspicions that it wasn't such a disappointment. I didn't really mind in the least, personally. I wasn't upset at all. So we only ever got to, as I say, to a rough edit put together on video. And anyone who thinks that rough edit then ended up being used on Pakistan television, it did not. Yeah. I've seen the stuff on YouTube, and it didn't. But so I've got still a little notebook of everything that I did, and so at that stage, just Kodachrome slide film, 360 cells and all the cell paint that goes with it. I spent £50 making a kind of fully professional looking 30-second advert, and I spent 250 hours.
My goodness. In
total. But it's funny because when you look at my little notebook and the dates in it, you think, were you just about to move house then, George, from where you were renting a Spartan cottage in Shillington to buying a house in Luton? You know, there was so much else going on in your life. You were holding down a full-time job. You were over a 3-month period, you were obviously putting in 20 hours a week making this
Animation.
in addition to a full-time job, and so on. So, so that was that. But I eventually then, because I made, say, when I made Chessboard or Illusion, and I was working on colour negative film, working on optical soundtrack, well, magnetic soundtracks then mixed down to a single optical soundtrack. I literally kind of spliced the dentonic work onto the end of one of these films, and sending it to the lab. Right, this is, I want all of this processed and professional end product, and so, they would send it back, and either, I then had to cut off the dentonic bit, or I explained to them that, I want the dentonic bit separate.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it would never have ended up in the version that you can now see on the show reel.
Yeah.
But I'm delighted. And then you start, at various times I've toyed with the idea of, as I said, of trying to work in the animation industry. Not being too disappointed. That could have been a calling card. If that had it, I still think our version is better than the one they did.
Well, everyone who sees it loves it, don't they? Yeah. And remember it.
Yes, and if they've seen the one on Pakistani television, YouTube videos, it's fine, but the animation is not rounded animation. Right. It's not, but that's what they wanted. We had a brief. I've still got all the notes. Do you really want a pink face? And the answer is yes.
Yes,
it is a pink face. That's what we use. Oh right, okay. So a stripy grey top, and what colour will the trousers be? What colour should the shoes be? We were told, and that's what they did.
And the font as well, I think you said.
Well, that's right. As I say, it's their font, of course.
Yeah.
I think our version would have stood. I mean, it's just one. It doesn't bother me, but you would have thought our version would have been even better received.
Yes.
One of the comments on YouTube videos nowadays is that this dentonic tooth powder advert, which is sort of 1984, 1985, they say it was one of the first animated commercials on TV in Pakistan.
Right.
And I can believe it, having seen some of these compilation tapes you can now get of such era commercials in Pakistan. Yes, all the other ones are just live action things. So you think, yes, it's a shame. It's a shame that they didn't end up using our version. And gosh, that would have been a really good calling card. Who knows what else might have developed from it? But that's at the commercial end. At least you think, yes, that's work. That as opposed to art. Although there's a lot of art goes into it, but in the end, it's someone else's concept. And the answer is yes. Me and obviously in all kinds of other ways. In our little space at 33,
for sure.
We could produce absolutely commercial quality product as well as arty stuff.
Yeah. Were you tempted, given you made the model, to go into animating the model at all?
No, I'd say going
to
film festivals. In the early 80s, film festivals, it always seemed there was a lot of plasticine around.
Yes.
Of course, Nick Park was the one who perfected it, but there was an awful lot of student work which was using plasticine. Never really interested me to animate with plasticine. And then, you okay on the technical side? You're checking the camera screen. And then by, say, 1990, everything was computer-based. People were doing skeleton wireframe animations on computers. I remember someone had the Statue of Liberty, which was just all a kind of wireframe that was amazing, because here was the Statue of Liberty rotating, Nowadays it's nothing. But So, but no, I've used plasticine to then cover it with acrylic paint and all the rest of it, but not as an actual thing to animate.
Yeah, I can never remember seeing that. I must have seen it in the pub that day, but that's amazing.
You probably did.
Yeah.
We can do maybe a little close-up of that photograph and insert it. But so yes, that was that. So there we are. I think that's, we can cover any questions, but that's all on the creative side.
So George, then you got involved at 33, but
so yeah,
then
so take a deep breath. I'm on the admin side. Yeah. So
on the admin side.
So I turned up in October '81, and just as a user and audience at the arts facility in Guildford Street, and but others have dealt with the full history. But sort of the Community Arts Trust was essentially set up in about 1978.
78 is the...
Coming on from other things, I know, before my time, therefore. Now, I don't know, but this is a conversation, so but was that actually a registered charity or just a charity in the general sense of the word?
No, it was registered in 78, I think.
Okay.
And
but not as a company. So
no.
For some reason, and I think the name Pat Ealing comes into it, but that's before my time.
Yeah, Pat Ealing was the chair of the Local Arts Council.
Fair enough.
And as you probably aware, there are kind of various loose committees that looked after the basic legal side of the charity.
Yeah, so I'm quite impressed, because it was before my time, that they then decided that they wanted to, in what was standard in those days, to form a company limited by guarantee and registered with the Charity Commission.
That's right, yeah.
So that's obviously what happened. And then there was an inaugural meeting. Anyone who wanted to be a member of the company was promising to contribute £1 if called upon to do so, if the company was ever wound up.
Yes.
So that's what the company limited by guarantee was, usually a nominal £1. They had this inaugural meeting. I attended that because it was of some interest to me. And someone asked a question. It might have been about this guarantee side of things, wanting reassurance. And whoever was running the meeting wasn't able to answer the question. I was able to answer the question. Can't remember exactly what it was. So then someone who was running the meeting said, "You'd better be on the committee." Okay. So again, we'll come back to it, but as a local solicitor, and quite apart from being a user of the centre, yes, one expects to help on the legal side of running things. So fair enough. So I think Pat Ealing at that point had planned to retire from such active involvement. Yeah. So, but all credit to him and them for putting the whole thing together.
Yes.
Not easy to do. And my notes that I've been looking at over the last couple of days was that Tony O'Neill was the first chairman appointed.
Oh wow.
Of the Arts Trust Company.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I was on the committee.
Yeah.
And shortly afterwards, he bowed out, and Hugh Sperrin took over as chair.
Yeah.
Fine. So we need to tread carefully here in terms of the admin side and the potential problem side of how things were running. That firstly, there was a report. Again, this was originated before my time, but it then appeared. There was an analysis of the Arts Centre done by the Policy Studies Institute, which I had a copy of at one time, but have not been able to locate for a long time. So, in conversation, Paul, do you have a copy of the Policy Studies Institute? I've been online. Yeah. They are now... There's a lot of organisations with similar names, but no, think carefully, the Policy Studies Institute is now part of the University of Westminster.
Okay.
I've been on their website, and their reports digitised archive goes back to 1990, but not any earlier.
Ah, interesting.
So,
yeah.
if nobody has the Policy Studies Institute report, between us we ought to track it down via the University of Westminster, because I think it is an important part
Yes.
of the archive.
Yeah.
But maybe someone else does have a copy, but I haven't seen it for donkey's years.
That's really interesting. No, I haven't seen it.
Fair enough.
Truly
So
through
that was
it.
part of it.
Yeah.
And then also there was another consultancy report. I've got the name of the bloke. I forget. It's quite a long-winded name. But this was commissioned by analysing the trust on behalf and paid for by Luton Borough Council and I think Eastern Arts Association. And the main conclusion of that was that although a charity, a company charity had been formed, and it had, we call it the Council of Management, but you can equally call them trustees, that the trustees were not really running things as they should. That basically the place had carried on operating as a workers' collective.
Yes, I think that's true.
I can assure you it didn't bother me in the least,
Yeah.
but it bothered the funders.
Yes.
And it was, let's face it, a lot of these things are down to the tax laws. That these were a collective group who were all essentially self-employed, therefore no contracts of employment, a loose association of self-employed people working as a collective. And this worried the Borough Council, this worried Eastern Arts in terms of putting big real money into the place. And so the result of the consultancy was that we needed to be clear who was legally in charge, not the workers' collective, but the trustees of the company, of the charity. So that was understood, that things needed to change. So I'll refer to her as Linda, although Linda is often referred to elsewhere as Muddy, which is fine, but I'll try and be consistent and refer to Linda. So Linda was then appointed as director.
Yes.
That was the first step.
Yeah.
And eventually the management line of management in terms of other people was then slowly but surely established.
Yeah.
Again, others can probably comment more. So I haven't seen any interview of Linda's. I've seen some others.
Yeah.
So
There's
I know
been-
she's done an interview, but I haven't seen that. So stop me if I'm boring you.
No. I mean, she in her interview, she obviously mentions that.
And if I'm prompting
The-
you, Paul, there are other things that you can probably better cover than I can,
Yeah.
because you were there throughout. But that was that. So we satisfied the council that we needed to make changes so that we were properly accountable as charity trustees, both to Charity Commission and to the Borough Council. And Hugh decided that he really didn't want to carry on being chair anymore. And can I ask, what's happened to Hugh?
No idea.
He made a few videos, by the
Yeah.
way. I can remember some of his videos.
Need-
So he was
need to
very
find a
much
way to track him
involved.
down.
He
probably.
worked in
Yeah.
college in St Albans.
That's right. Yeah.
And so anyway, but so he decided that it was almost local politics and diplomacy. It was better if he. Not that there was any direct criticism of him at all, but for whatever reason. So that's the point at which I became chair of the Trustees Council of Management, and constitutionally the trustees can appoint a fresh chair every meeting.
Yes. But
Instead of which I've been doing it for 40 years.
40 years, George.
But anyway,
Yeah.
so but it seemed to satisfy the Borough Council. we had meetings with the council. We attended subcommittee meetings of the arts subcommittee and all kinds of things. And I like to sometimes describe it, me and maybe some others, that I was able to provide a thin veneer of respectability to a bunch of increasingly ageing hippies, really.
Yes, well, that's a nice way to put it. But just to put the record straight,
yes.
This is prior to the forming, because this was a different issue, wasn't it? Forming of the trading company, that came later.
We'll come to that, absolutely. This was the first step, really, was setting aside the workers' cooperative and having proper people who really were workers should have contracts of employment and should be properly accountable as employees. So, and you'll give the figures better than me, but we were, and the point was at that time, mid-80s, you'll correct me, it was a Tory administration at Luton.
Yes.
And we got on fine. And they were reassured that things were being properly run. Financially, of course, the Community Arts Trust was extremely solvent and careful with its money.
Yeah.
Was and still is.
It's never one of the very few arts charities that's never had a deficit.
I always had the greatest confidence in those dealing with it day to day. I always felt that it only needed what you might call a light hand on the tiller.
Yeah.
There were times when one had to make executive decisions, but generally it was best to realise that things were being very smoothly run from a legal and financial point of view, and not to try and interfere on the artistic side of it, and just provide some encouragement, decisions when decisions had to be taken, but a light hand on the tiller. And again, I've come across other organisations where that wasn't the case.
No, especially in the arts, it became.
So you tell me, but we ended up with a turnover of easily £250,000.
Yes.
And the way I looked upon it was that if we were getting a revenue grant from the council of either side of 100,000 a year, that we could attract the same again from other sources.
Yes.
So in terms of value for money for ratepayers, council taxpayers, poll taxpayers even at one time, this was good for the town.
Yes.
That it was a good investment on the council's part. Yeah. It was a good return on their investment, and we were the only arts centre in town.
That's right, and it ticked their boxes in terms of arts.
Yeah, so it worked. It worked very well, and it was working very well. So a couple of things then developed. We obviously had plans to expand. We had 33 Guildford Street. We took on 35 Guildford Street. We took on 35A Guildford Street. I was involved on some of the leases side of that. And so on, but that was all fine. Because the 33 building always belonged to the council.
Yes, 33 did, and then 35 was...
35 was privately owned. We took on a private lease there, 35A. All of that. So the next thing that really happened, I think, was our dealings with the Charity Commission, who were always extremely straightforward to deal with. I know people, I've now ended up as trustee of another charity, won't go into that. And I know people worry about being a trustee of a charity. But my dealings with the Charity Commission, a little bit professionally on other things, and certainly, they were always straightforward to deal with, in my opinion. So we got to the point where the film and video side, which you'll see from other interviews, had Channel 4 funding and all kinds of things going on, was worrying the Charity Commission. That this seemed to be a kind of semi-commercial activity that was not really part of our constitution.
Yeah,
So we ended up with one or more meetings in London with the charity commissioners, which were all very amicable and straightforward, and resulted then really in that the film and video needed to be a separate organisation. Now you'll correct me, but there was equally the issue of other semi-commercial activity that wasn't, and on the recording side, because there was a lot of recording side,
and even the use of the cafe, the charity commission.
Fair enough.
Felt.
Anyway, some commercial activities seem to be beyond the direct constitution of the arts activity of the constitution. So, so we then ended up with a more formal separation of the film and video.
Yes.
I can't comment on what their constitution was because that was up to them.
Yes.
But we had a more formal arrangement that they were quite separate.
Yeah.
They occupied parts of the building.
Yeah.
I say occupied when they're up there. They had license to use.
Yeah, I think money changed hands in some places. I think rental of certain areas, and
there were notional payments and all the rest of it. So there was a little bit of friction at some points, but it was all resolved. And I can't, as there must have been times. I know there were times when my handling of things was probably a bit clumsy, but I'm sorry, that's how things are.
I don't think so. I think people thought that steady hand or kind of the legal advice was really important.
Well, I've got minutes of one particular EGM that we had when I know there were a lot of film and video people attended and were quite agitated about what was happening. And I think everyone was reassured by the end of that meeting that some of the wording that we'd come up with in draft statements and things was a bit clumsy and unnecessary. But sorry, we didn't really mean to upset anybody or interfere in any way. So that had to be resolved, and hopefully was resolved. But as you say, then it was necessary to set up a trading company as a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary of the trust, which still exists, which you and I are directors.
Yes.
All the shares held by Luton Community Arts Trust. 33 RPM is the trading company, and that's worked okay.
Yeah.
So that was that. Then, of course, really we could see that the present premises were pretty dilapidated,
Absolutely.
Not fit for purpose, and we had real clear plans as to what the town really needed, and you'll correct me now or else or another time, that we persuaded the council, Tory controlled, to acquire the hat factory in Bute Street.
That's correct. Yes.
And the expectation was that we would be moving to and running the Bute Street project.
Yes.
That coincided then with the council becoming Labour controlled, and they had a manifesto promise that the town should have a Citizens Advice Bureau.
That's correct. Yes.
I'll deal with that issue as well because it's interesting. I'm interested in seeing other people's interviews, just how widely all these things interact.
Yes.
But anyway, fair enough, they had their own agenda, and so there was this empty building. So the first thing that they did was install a tourist information centre and a Citizens Advice Bureau on the main ground floor of the Bute Street building, which rather compromised how you could possibly use it as an arts centre.
Yeah, well, that included partitioning a lot of the other floors,
etc.
into offices. Yeah.
So, but that was their manifesto promise, and so so that happened, and I'm just going off at a tangent. You can edit this out if you want, but I mean, Luton had never had a Citizens Advice Bureau. Incredible, because the council had seemed to be always against it.
Yeah.
The council had its own legal advice centre. I mean, I've worked in Luton, I've worked in Hitchin, I've worked Biggleswade, Harpenden, but not very far from Luton all the time. You know, there was a time that I helped with sessions at the Luton Legal Advice Centre, run round the back of the town hall.
Yes.
So the council provided premises, staffed voluntarily by local lawyers, and I helped set up and run legal advice sessions at the CAB in Hitchin. And I'd also, it's a long time ago, but I must have been involved in some legal advice sessions when I was working on Merseyside, but it's an awful long time ago. But, so, you know, fine, you know, I can understand the need to that because I've been directly involved in those kind of things. But obviously that rather complicated our plans.
For sure.
So again, this is a conversation, you can probably help me along here, but so that was the situation we were left with. At some point we also then developed plans that, quite apart from the Arts Centre in Bute Street, which was opened as Artesium,
Yes.
that we would have a jazz-based arts facility.
Yeah, a music education
Whatever.
venue.
It wouldn't be in competition with Bute Street, and we put in our own funding bids, didn't we? And for a decent performance space and all kinds of other facilities. That was seen as a kind of rivalry, or certainly in the local papers was described as a rivalry.
I think it's getting the timing right between these events, because there was certainly we were commissioned by the then Eastern Arts, going back to what became Artesium, as the major client, and we had plans and drawings drawn up for what is now the Hat Factory.
Anyway, clearly what was happening in Bute Street was not really what we were hoping to happen at all.
No.
I was certainly approached as to would I be on the new, essentially become a trustee of the Bute Street project, and the answer was, well, no, because there is at least potential conflict of interest between LCAT and Bute Street. Although, you know, we're trying to work harmoniously, but legally, you know, I couldn't, you know, do the two. They thought that LCAT would just curl up and die.
Absolutely,
I know some did. So that was the situation there. We didn't curl up and die. Did we at that time take on premises in Hightown Road? Or
Yeah,
where were we? Well, we stayed on in Guildford Street.
We stayed on in Guildford Street, and then we went into the Hat Factory.
No, we went to Hightown Road first, did we not?
To the shop we had.
The shop.
Yes.
The first one there.
Yeah.
And yes, we had, just to emphasise that we vacated Guildford Street, and we'd ended up with the lease 35A, that obliged us to hand back the premises windproof and watertight, which was an incredible minimum requirement. The landlord, again, legally, legitimately, tried to force a schedule of dilapidations on us, saying, before you hand back the premises, there's a lot has deteriorated during your time, and you know, we want the premises back.
Yes.
And the answer is, you've every intention of demolishing them.
Yes.
We are not legally required to do any work to premises which are clearly going to be demolished, which they were. 35. 33 as well in the end, wasn't it?
33 in the end was the
But 35 first.
Yeah.
And anyway, they are windproof and watertight. They may have everything else wrong with them.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was something I'm quite pleased with, that's
sure.
how we'd managed to arrange it
Yes.
when we'd signed up to the lease. Well, it was a renewal lease, I think, that we'd negotiated that point. So we were able to vacate Guildford Street and basically just walk away from Guildford Street with no commitments.
I think it's worth remembering that you've already mentioned it, when we produced plans for the 33 and 35 site for the Arts Council, Jim Milne, do you remember, produced a set of drawings and plans, which the Arts Council of England were really pleased about. They saw the process, and there was a kind of a tentative offer to us for capital money to actually put all of that into.
Yes, we would have had to buy 35
Yes.
and basically probably buy 33 from the council.
Yes, and the only stipulation from the Arts Council was that the Borough Council would grant us a 10 or 20-year
Yes,
lease
on 33. Yeah.
on 33. That would have, if they'd agreed to do that, and we're now looking back, we're looking at a building that got demolished in 2000, whenever, and is still
Empty
space, still empty space, nothing developed in it.
No, lots of student flats right next to it, and clearly a perfect place to build some more student flats.
Absolutely.
Standing empty still.
But it's still standing empty, and we're 25 years later.
Yes.
So the Borough Council could have made so much.
Yes, the whole redevelopment of Guildford Street.
It would have been done. It would have been the first stage of.
They had a stake in it, only 33.
Yeah.
And there was this dilapidated part being demolished next door.
Yes.
Golden opportunity missed.
Yeah.
But it coincided right up until this time. The Bute Street site was an operating hat factory.
Yes.
And it became available. So that then became a serious, suitable alternative.
Yeah.
So as you know, we didn't curl up and die. We carried on running community projects, etc. And as we know, the Bear Club in recent times has opened up across the road in Guildford Street, which was exactly the kind of performance space that we always argued the town needed.
Absolutely.
And could have been created in the late 80s.
I know. And also would have had a whole range of education facilities.
All the rest of it. But in terms of does the town really need the kind of performance space that we were proposing?
Yeah.
Yes, because look, it now exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
But never mind.
Yeah.
So, as we know, Artesium was a financial disaster. Went into administration.
Yes.
But nothing to do with us. We were not occupying any part of that building.
No.
We were doing our own thing, and
continuing as an organisation,
but
providing projects.
The council then had to rescue Bute Street, rejig the whole thing. Essentially invited us to occupy one floor of it to run our projects in that building as part of.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's what we'd always argued. And by that time, there wasn't a CAB or tourist information. It was then available as the whole building could be an arts centre. So, just to be clear, you and I are not directly involved in any way with the hat factory.
Not at all. But
but
Peel is a tenant. We had, we had the top floor as well as the studio.
Yes.
At some point,
So there we are. So these things take, sometimes go in the right direction, and then.
I mean, the sad thing about the hat factory is that because of the CAB original development as a citizens advice bureau, those partitioning, those on the upper floors, completely went against the original plans that we had for the centre. In terms of creating open spaces for artists and proper dance studios and all of those kinds of things.
Yes. So again, just dealing with the essential history. So certainly at the time then, when I'd say the Labour took control of the council, and we were receiving nevertheless an annual revenue grant, and then there came a point when we simply didn't get the grant halfway through the year.
Yes.
Halfway through the year. And I've looked recently through the correspondence about this. And the council were very clear and bold and blunt and said, well, yeah, but we only release the money to you every 3 months. So if we suddenly decide during the financial year no longer to release the money, we've every right to do so. And which I had to write back and say, well, could you run the council if suddenly halfway through the year the money you'd been promised was taken away from you? How can you run a business? How can we be accountable to the Charity Commission to run a prudently, financially safe business if suddenly the money we've been promised is taken away because you need to employ someone to develop Bute Street? That was the thing. Well, we need this money because we have to. As you know, we have to take this money away from you because, you know, it's part of the arts budget, and we must appoint somebody to start organising Bute Street. Sorry, but anyway, that's what they did, it was not a pleasant time.
It was not a pleasant time. It was very politically driven as well, with so, you know, councillors that will probably remain nameless at the moment, but who were violently opposed to arts of any description.
Yes, I'll comment that you know, we obviously had councillors. Originally, I think nobody really worried about the rules. I think we had councillors, or certainly council officials, Howard in particular, who were virtually, you know, on the council of management, almost virtually trustees of the trust. And then, oh, hold on a minute, not if you're funding us, you've got to be arm's length. But we still had council employees, councillors attending our meetings on an observer status. As we attended council meetings on an observer status, so that they had some knowledge of what was being done with public money. That was all fine, but there were times, more than one occasion, I was chairing things, and councillors would say, George, you're not really doing this according to standing orders. I would say, sorry, this isn't a council meeting. They had no, they would thought we were like part of the council, you know, and we must operate according to the council standing orders, which I never knew what they were. The answer is no, we are an independent charity which you have funded. We will run ourselves accountable to the Charity Commission and slightly to Companies House. You know, we are not, but we were treated almost as if we were part of the council, and therefore, you know, the main committees of the council could decide things, which we just were lumbered with, almost as if we were a council department.
Yeah, it's like that kind of whole level of centralisation that the council saw themselves responsible for everything. In terms of, I mean, it wasn't just us. There were other small charitable trusts that looked after youth clubs, and they all came under that same strange centralised.
Indeed. So there we are. We muddled along as best we could. But we more or less concluded all of this. But as I say, so just to bring it sort of up to date. So then, because further redevelopment in Bute Street, we and everyone was obliged to move out of Bute Street, and so we took and have tenancy at will, an easily determinable tenancy at 77 Hightown Road.
That's right.
Which we use as a base for our activities. And that's where we're up to at the moment.
Yes, and you know, this project that we do now is the kind of legacy project for the trust, so we'll see what the next 50 years brings.